guys, this is Barry once again with a little video lesson for you, this time on Chapter 9. Chapter 9 is all about user-defined functions. I've already got the board notes printed up for you out there on resources, so you'll want that handy. Also, you'll want a copy of your workbook by you as we start looking at this, so if you'll get those ready, we'll be ready to go. As we start off with user-defined functions, let's take a look at how you declare a function. Starts with the reserved word function, and then a space, the name of the function that you choose, same rules as variable names, followed by parentheses and a series of arguments. We'll talk more about what's involved in those arguments a little bit later, but you'll have a series of arguments or parameters separated by commas. Enclose those in parentheses. Then open your curly brackets, put in the lines of code that make up this function, and close your curly brackets, setting off the block that identifies this function. And that is how you declare a function. We'll talk more about what goes inside and what those arguments are a little bit later. We're going to talk about 4 different ways of working with functions. Here's the first one. Method 1 is dealing with values inside the function simply by using a predefined function, much like square root. And the way that we'll do that is by setting up a variable name like $result, assign that to, for example, sqrt of 144, and then a semicolon. And when the square root function is executed, its results will be stored in $result, and then you'll be able to use those results later on in the program. That's the first and easiest way of working with functions, but those aren't user-defined functions. So let's look at user-defined functions. In this example of a user-defined function, we've got a function named larger. It has 2 parameters, $num1 and $num2. You see the curly brackets there, and then some comments and lines of code that look just like any other lines of code in any PHP program. For our purposes in this example, the main program begins below the comment that says function is called by the following line. When we call that function, using the line that says $result is assigned larger of 15, minus 22. You'll see that the 15 is in the same position as $num1 in the function definition, and minus 22 is in the same position as $num2. This means that inside the function, every time we reference $num1, 15 will be used in its place, and every time we reference $num2, minus 22 will be referenced in its place. We'll be doing an example like this in demos. Let's take a look at the 2 ways that we can get arguments into a function, passing by value and passing by reference. Passing by value is the default method of getting any type of argument into a function. You don't have to do anything special or different than you would normally, or different from what we've shown in examples already. When you declare your function and the argument or arguments inside the parentheses do not have any special characters in front of them, by default you're passing by value. And here's what that means in a nutshell. All you're doing is sending a copy of the value in that variable into the function. The original data stored in that variable and accessible in the main program cannot be changed by anything done inside the function. This is a safety mechanism and the default behavior of passing arguments. But sometimes you actually want the function to be able to change the value that's stored in a variable. So passing by reference is the answer. Notice we have an ampersand in front of the $sign in the parentheses where I have my arguments listed in the function declaration. That's all you need to do. In the main program, nothing changes, but this time, when you pass in a value, you're actually passing the address, the memory location of where that variable is stored, so any changes that are made inside that function will actually affect the value that is stored in that variable, and those changes will be visible in the main program and throughout the rest of the program until that variable is reassigned. At this point, please pause the video and, using the board notes, work out what the output would be for all of the echo statements in the two examples, method 3 and method 4, for passing by value and passing by reference. When you're done, then you can start the video back up. Now let's look at these three questions of how functions fit in. Why should you use a function? Where should you declare functions within your program? And where should a function declaration be with respect to the main program? Let's take a look at why we should use functions. One excellent reason for using a function is if you need to execute the same segment of code multiple times within the same program. A second reason is if that segment of code might be used in more than one program. And from an efficiency standpoint, one of the most important reasons is to conserve memory. And here's why. If you actually list the segments of code that would be in a function multiple times within the program, first, the program is much larger than it needs to be. But secondly, every time those lines of code are executed, we're creating more and more space that's being used in memory. And the beauty of a function is the function is declared once when the program is first executed, and the space in memory is set aside for it one time. And after that, we simply reference back to that same place in memory instead of creating multiple new places in memory every time we include that segment in the code once again. So where do functions go within your program? You can declare a function anywhere you want inside your program, but it is a good idea to always put your functions at or near the top of the program. It's also a good idea to clearly document your code to indicate where the main program begins. Let's talk about scope. No, not the mouthwash. Variable scope. We're going to look at three different types of variable scope. Those three scopes are variables can be either local, global, or static. By default, when you declare a variable inside a function, it is going to be local in scope. And what we mean by that is the variables created inside a function are not visible or accessible anywhere except inside that function. Outside the function, they simply do not exist. In programming terms, that would be undeclared or unset. Sometimes you need a variable to be accessible both inside and outside a function, and those we call global. And variables that are in the main program that you want to be accessible inside the function, you can either pass those in as a parameter, and then of course you can do that either by value or by reference, or you can make the variable global in the main program. Global variables are visible everywhere, both in the main program and inside all functions that are called by that program. The last type of scope that we'll look at is static. Use static anytime you want or need a function to remember the value of some variable from one function call to the next. We'll have an example of each of these in the demos that you'll do a little bit later in the show today.